Thank you so much for coming. This is McKesson's session. Coming out as Two-Spirit in the workplace. It's nice to see everyone right after lunch. I know it's a little bit of a daunting time, but you're in for a treat. You're about to meet Laura Longwell, one of McKesson's leaders who started working with the Pride ERG with McKesson, and eventually, after a little bit of time with that, started considering other avenues and came out as Two-Spirit as part of her work, also opening up an ERG named Unity for the Native American and Indigenous tribes. Please help me welcome Laura Longwell to personal story about McKesson. When she's not here, nervously talking about herself, but she will obviously tell you. She's at home with her two amazing Huskies. She's a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and obviously she's a graphic artist for McKesson. That's obviously why we love her to death. But her work with her ERG is what brought her here today. So please help me again welcome Laura Long.
Well, thank you, James. Halito, my name's Laura Longwell, as James said. I go by any and all pronouns, and I am a Two-Spirit and gender fluid member, enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I'll stand out from the podium for a second. For those who might be visually impaired, I am standing awkwardly up here. Short, curly, brunette hair, in a long white long sleeve shirt with purple diamonds, a gold beaded medallion, black slacks, and moccasins. And so, as we all like to begin in the Native and the community, I want to start with a land acknowledgement as well, honoring the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Southern Payet and Chemaway nations that we are here learning, working, and organizing on today. As James said, I work at McKesson, a pharmaceutical company that you might have heard of if you walk by our booth. But we're a Fortune 9 company that nobody's ever heard of, and what I like to tell people is that we're the ones distributing the COVID vaccine. That's how you're going to hear about us. So chances are that when you walk through a hospital or a doctor's office, you'll see our logo on the medical supplies, but that's about all. That's how you're going to see us. I'd like to start off today by a little bit of an icebreaker, but for all those introverts out here, it's minimal engagement. I'm not asking for much. It's really just to kind of get to know y'all and see who you all are out there. So I want to start out and ask just raise your hand and say who is a member of the LGBTQIA community? Well, I'd be shocked if you weren't. So. Okay. How many of y'all are Indigenous? There you go. I'm glad to see some brothers and sisters out in the audience here today. And then lastly, how many of y'all have heard of the term Two-Spirit before? Excellent. That's a lot more hands than I thought, so I'm glad to see we have some experience here as well. I have to admit that this is my first time presenting formally in front of a crowd. Most of my presentation skills have taken place behind a screen in these last few years, as many of y'all might have also had taken place. But I'm very excited and honored to talk to you all today. As James said, I want to share a little bit about my journey of coming out as Two-Spirit, some of the things that happened in my life that made me realize this about myself, and how McKesson has fostered a place of belonging that has helped me on this journey. We'll spend the next 30 minutes or so going through this story of how I, as a very young kid, grew up naive and sheltered, which it's a funny story. But I found a space for myself after creating a space for Native and Indigenous employees at McKesson. And we will have some time for Q&A at the end. But like every great superhero story, you've got to start at the beginning. So. I was a cute kid, right? I grew up in Dallas, Texas. My parents, there you go. I grew up with my parents and two brothers, younger brothers, and I grew up as just one of the boys. I was never into Barbie dolls or makeup. I was really more into sports and Power Rangers, and Red Power Ranger all the way. If I saw one of my younger brothers doing it, as long as it wasn't dumb or icky, I wanted to do it too, and you usually try to do it better. I was the typical little tomboy who had no idea that this wasn't how most girls saw the world. I also had a special connection to a small town just north of the Red River in Oklahoma called Durant. This is where my parents grew up and where my grandparents have quite a bit of farmland. As kids, my brothers and I would spend our summers riding four-wheelers, fixing fence, wading through rivers, anything really. And we really never stopped to think about some of the things that should have scared us, including how afraid of snakes as I am. I grew up thinking that this was every kid's normal experience when they went to grandma's. And in that same naive vein, I never batted an eye at how engulfed I was in my own native culture. Thanks all in part to my grandparents and parents. You see, Durant, Oklahoma is the headquarters of Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I also never realized that not everyone grows up going to the same church as their chief. Anytime I was at my grandparents', we'd go with them to church, and the Choctaw chief, Greg Pyle, was in attendance most every Sunday. He was actually a close family friend of ours up until his passing a few years ago. My parents loved telling the story from when I was little. During one of the presidential elections, maybe Bill Clinton, when I asked the question as maybe like a little 5-year-old of why do I need a president when I have a chief? This was completely normal in my mind. I just assumed that the chief would have a close and personal relationship with everyone in their tribe. This shirt that I'm wearing today actually is a gift from Chief Pyle from when I was younger. It's a men's traditional Choctaw shirt that I think he thought I would someday grow into, but there's a reason why it's tucked in. I only wish I cherished it as much as when he first gave it to me, as I could do now. I also remember in 2nd grade, I had a school play for the first Thanksgiving. And of course, I wanted to play one of the Indians, but my teacher had other plans and cast me as a Pilgrim girl. Needless to say, I was quite upset by this. In my eyes, who could play an Indian better than an actual Indian? And on top of everything, they cast me to be in a dress, which as you can see, I was not a happy kid. Like really. My grandparents and parents did a really great job of making sure I knew who I was, that it was something I should be proud of, and that I never heard much of the bad surrounding any of the stereotypes of being an Indian. Now, if you haven't caught on to the naivety, that is my childhood. I'm not sure where you've been these last few minutes, but it's also not ending anytime soon. You see, as I got older, this idea of being a tomboy became more and more of a focal point, and even at times a stress point, as I'm sure it was with most of you who grew up being labeled as such. The girls started to shave their legs, wear makeup, even talk about boys, and I never had much interest in any of that. Now, I did learn to quickly follow suit, unfortunately, help myself blend in with those challenging years of growing up, but I always knew that that was not, I didn't have the same thought process and the same interest as the other girls. I didn't even know the term lesbian until 9th grade. The only reason why I did know that term and learn what it meant was because I had a lesbian hitting on me persistently for a whole semester, love notes and all. It's only going to get worse from here. And that's what my friends would call it. Now, I never have been one for knowing when somebody's liked me or is hitting on me, so I never actually registered these love notes as something, anything more than that. I just thought that this is what girls did amongst each other at that age. And it really wasn't until I was cleaning out my room to move off to college later on, many years from then, that I found one, reread it, and realized, oh no, these are very much so love notes, and I am very much so an oblivious idiot who should have known better. But again, naivety. I ended up coming up my senior year of high school with a girlfriend who only lasted about 2 weeks, but it was still nice to be out with friends and family. I have and have always had a really good support system, which made coming out rather easy for me, and I realized just how fortunate I am to have that process. So coming out as Two-Spirit, things were quite honestly easy and smooth sailing in the sexual identity department after coming out in high school. I had a couple more girlfriends and even got engaged during college. Before that fell through. Thank God. I thought this was exactly who I was meant to be. After college, I was only just starting my internship at McKesson, so I decided to move back home to save some money and enjoy some time with my parents. And I really didn't question this thought, or this decision, until COVID happened, to be quite honest. Don't get me wrong, like I said, I have a great support system with my parents, and I get along with them great. But being with them for 24 hours a day is a bit of a choice. So I decided to search for my home, or make a search for my home. Like much of us, we figured out that this work from home thing was going to be a lot more permanent than 2 weeks. I thankfully closed on a home right before the big real estate bubble at the end of 2020. And must I say, it was quite glorious. All throughout college, I had some sort of roommate, so I'd never really gotten to experience what it was like to truly be on my own. I could decorate how I wanted, have whatever food in the fridge that I wanted, even walk around the house wearing what I wanted, or lack thereof, and it was great. But something also popped up that I didn't expect. It was this idea of, was this really what I wanted? And it was not pertaining to this idea of this house that I had just purchased, because I really did love that. But it was rather something pointing me back to my identity. As I was able to make more of these choices that I wanted, truly on my own, I started looking at things that I always told myself were things that I wanted, but under this new lens, wondered if that was really true or if it was because I was doing it for others. Now, when I say this, I don't mean that I came out as lesbian for other people, but rather the thoughts that were going on in my head were more around expressing who I was. You see, as a young kid, things were always just put into place for me. I never really had to think about whether I should or want to do them. I was just told I should be doing these things. Whether it be from growing up in the Church of Christ, which for anyone in Bible Belt knows it's strict, to being a student athlete, to being told that college is a must after high school. All of these things had strict rules in place that didn't leave much room for thought on my part. Thinking about it, I never made a major choice on my own prior to purchasing a house. Of course, I'd had some say in it all, and all of these choices were ultimately choices that I was happy and very grateful with, don't get me wrong, but there wasn't a lot of thought process on my part for any of these. Everything up to that point had been dictated for me, right for the picking, making it hard for me to say no to such a great opportunity, which in some ways could be seen as sad, but it also shows just how naive and sheltered I grew up. And it also made me realize just how privileged of a life I had. So after making this realization, I began to think about what I really wanted in life. Some could call it a quarter-life crisis, 4 years too late. But in that, I began to realize that there are certain things about my body that I also never really liked. I do want to pause here and give a small trigger warning. I will be talking about my own body dysmorphia here for just a second. I don't plan on getting too deep in the nitty-gritty of it all, but I do want to make that call out for anyone who might need it. I'd always struggled with body issues all throughout junior high and high school, and it was the typical, you gotta look a certain way because you're a girl, and that's what media tells you you should look like. I tried a good handful of diets throughout that time, roller coastering up and down on the scale, and likewise having my mental state go with it. For me in particular, I was always envious of those who had a more androgynous or lean body frame. And I was also never in love with my chest, to be quite honest. Really just neutral about it. But it would get in the way when somebody would misgender me, only to later notice them and really be confused about it all. Like I said earlier, I was just one of the boys. growing up, and that included running around topless, as you saw from those photos. As I got older, I liked being outside a lot and hated having very awkward tan lines or having a shirt full of sweat that I could never take off like all the other boys. So this made me think that maybe perhaps I am transgender because I wanted top surgery. Being quite candid, I'd only scratched the surface at that time of my now transgender and non-binary knowledge, so I wasn't aware of the fact that a lot of non-binary folks have top surgery and even microdose of testosterone to achieve that more androgynous body. So at that time, I was under the assumption that I was trans just because I wanted to medically alter my body. But this idea of medically changing my body so extremely was also never a possibility for me. Even though I'd had LASIK surgery, hip surgery, and other medical procedures to medically correct my very, very broken body, altering my body for something that was a want versus a medical need in my very naive eyes was just not an option. Like I said, I'd grown up being told not to get tattoos or piercings. And in some ways, back at that time, I saw it as a similar comparison. I do know now that that's not the way I should have seen it, but again, naivety. There was also this legacy thought that, what are those around me going to think about it? I know I shouldn't care, but after spending so many years doing what others wanted me to do, it was kind of just the default process. Don't get me wrong, that this wasn't the only thing that made me come to this conclusion, but it was certainly the first signal that went off telling me that I don't fall under this normal binary. I think it was just also the only thing that opened up the gates that had locked away all these thoughts for so long. So I started to explore my gender identity a bit more and see if there was something out there that fit. I quickly determined that I didn't want to fully transition. Like I said, I really was just looking for the androgynous look and feel. But I acknowledge that there's a vast range of transgender people who express themselves in numerous ways. And it's not all about the transition or the surgery, as a lot of people like to think it is. Next, I considered the term non-binary. I did like the term, as it kind of fit, but I always felt very masculine, but also feminine. And in my personal view of the term, the term denotes not associating with either gender, which for me, that wasn't the case. I identify with both genders. And even though it wasn't a perfect match, I went ahead and started testing out non-binary. And as I continued to branch out and see what fit me, I started therapy and began taking a small dose of testosterone to help me achieve the more androgynous look and feel that I was going for. After my first shot, I felt an instant sense of happiness, productivity, and energy that I couldn't explain elsewhere. This is how I knew I was on the right track. And that was the day that I got the prescription. Around the same time, I was also working to start up a native and indigenous ERG at McKesson, which I will get more into detail about that here in a second, but that opened up my eyes to my native culture in a whole new way. It was through this process that I gained a wealth of knowledge, both about my Choctaw culture, as well as many other native cultures. And sure, I was busy. Anyone who has started up an ERG knows that. But I had never been happier. For the first time in my life, I felt energized and happy, and I was working on something that was fulfilling and meaningful to my people. And it was through this ERG process that I had discovered the term Two-Spirit. And though I never heard of the term before that, I knew that this was instantly me. So what is Two-Spirit? Two-Spirit is an umbrella term that bridges indigenous and Western understanding of gender and sexuality. In its simplest definition, Two-Spirit individuals are seen to have both masculine and feminine spirits. You may sometimes see a 2 or 2S written before or after the LGBTQ+ as a way of including this group. In 1990 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, at the 3rd annual Native American Gay and Lesbian Gathering, the term Two-Spirit was proposed and confirmed by a consensus. Though many tribes have nation-specific terms for Two-Spirit individuals dating well back before colonization. One of the reasons why Two-Spirit was adopted at this 1990 conference was that much of the written history of indigenous nations begins with a European contact and fails to include an accurate depiction of native life prior to colonization. Within the nations who have a concept of Two-Spirit, Two-Spirit individuals were often involved in performing work generally associated with both masculine and feminine roles. They often participated in activities such as matchmaking, hunting, or going into battle when needed, and were frequently seen as medicine people. Two-Spirit people were considered sacred and divine, and were often held highly in their communities. I should also note that not every Native person who identifies as LGBTQ+ also identifies as Two-Spirit. There are some in recent years who identify as both, but that's not always the case. And likewise, a non-Native should not and cannot identify as Two-Spirit. Now, I'm not saying that I consider myself sacred or divine, even though I am pretty awesome. But this was the identity I was looking for. It was a different way of looking at gender, less about what's between your legs, and more about breaking it down into fluidity between masculine and feminine roles. So now we're going to pick back up on that point where I had mentioned where I decided to start up a whole new ERG during this self-discovery process while working from home during the pandemic, because I wasn't busy enough. I'd always been vocal about my queer identity at work, being on the national board of our Pride ERG for our LGBTQ+ employees, but never had a place to share my Native identity. People knew I was Choctaw just as much as they knew I was gay, but I never got a place to advocate for that while at work. And yes, that is a wolf, and that was the top of my bucket list item, and I will always shamelessly brag about that. In August of 2020, after working on a project for the DE&I team, I asked for a favor in return. I asked the DE&I manager why doesn't McKesson have a Native and Indigenous ERG, and if she would start up one for me. Little did I know what I was really signing to myself. No matter, she mentioned how I wasn't the only one who was asking that same question at that time, and put me in contact with my now co-chair, Gigi Price, to help me begin that journey together. McKesson, at the time, had 8 ERGs, open or soon to be renamed Pride for our LGBTQ+ employees, Ability for our differently abled employees, MMRG for our military coworkers, Own It for our women, Aspire for our Black and African American employees, PAVE for our Pan-Asian employees, PALMA for our Hispanic employees, and EP or Emerging Professionals for anyone wanting to excel in their workplace. It also should be noted that at that same time of thinking about this, there were only 4 top 10 Fortune 500 companies who even had a Native and Indigenous ERG, which would make McKesson the 5th if we were to create one. See anyone else with photos? So once Gigi and I found out that we were both Choctaw, that's about all we needed to know to hit things off. It's kind of like finding the only other person at work who's queer and working with them. It's instant chemistry. So we set out to gauge interest for who might want to be a part of a Native and Indigenous ERG by creating a simple sign-up sheet and passing around our own individual networks, only then to ask them to do the same. We set up virtual meet and greets for employees who might be interested, where they could come together and not only hear our elevator pitch, but also meet other like-minded individuals within the company. It was actually through one of these first meet and greets that we landed our first guest speaker, World War II Navajo code talker, Mr. Thomas H. McGay, one of only 3 still remaining today, and who just so happens to have a granddaughter who works at McKesson. Once we had a few folks interested in not only joining a future established ERG, but also assisting us as board members we looked to organize our strategy as we aim to become official. It was my personal viewpoint to act as if we were already an ERG, so that when we did become official, it was a seamless transition. The existing 8 ERGs had already been established some odd years ago, so there wasn't a lot of existing process that we could replicate in order to create our foundation. But instead, we took a process of looking externally at what other large Fortune 500 companies were doing to compare notes, as well as what other corporations were doing locally in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where our headquarters is located at. We created a logo that is representative of the 500 plus federally recognized tribes, drafted foundational documents, and scheduled Native American Heritage Month events that would follow our formal launch as an ERG. We launched in August of 2021, 1 year after Gigi and I asked that simple question: why doesn't McKesson have a Native and Indigenous ERG? To date, we've had an Indigenous chef speak to our members regarding pre-colonial food preparation and food sovereignty, hosted said World War II code talker as he shared his story battling on the island of Iwo Jima for a country that didn't even recognize him as a U.S. citizen. Listen to a U.S. representative who is leading the way in being the first openly LGBTQ plus Native American elected to Congress. Garnered over 500 plus members within our first year of being an official ERG. And not only have we won multiple internal awards for efforts to stand up an ERG so efficiently, but we've also been able to uplift and spotlight several Indigenous employees who have not yet had a place to share their own stories. I should also note that since our launch, 2 more ERGs have popped up using foundational work we set out to create, and we also went through a bit of a brand refresh as well. So if we take a step back and look at what McKesson's doing on a larger scale to make sure we foster diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace, we see that they not only encourage ERG growth by helping employees start up ERGs, they also provide guidance on how they might go about doing so. Sure, we were the guinea pigs in this whole process, but they have made leaps and bounds in creating governance structures since then to help future ERGs. They also see the value in the ERG's work and want each ERG to thrive, so they have built out budgeting structures based off of membership numbers. This not only encourages ERGs to grow their numbers year over year, it also in turn increases the ERG budgets consistently. The DE&I team has 3 main pillars in which they use as North Stars: culture, talent, and marketplace. Looking at all 3 of these, I've been able to excel in each one thanks to my work done in partnership with the Pride and Unity ERGs, which is why ERG work is so important. McKesson's also looking at making sure they take care of their employees by creating a sense of belonging through their health benefits. Some of these include an inclusive gender transition policy, HIV treatment and prevention, and mental health treatment through our employee assistance program. And I should note that we also had some mid-year changes this year to ensure that they continue to meet employee needs. They eliminated parental caregiver designations to give both parents of newborn and adopted children 6 weeks of paid leave. They also provide medical travel benefits for those who cannot access care close to home. And this includes substance abuse disorder, cancer, abortion, and gender-affirming care. So as I begin to wrap up today, you might be asking yourself, how can I take this story back to my ERGs or my companies? First, I'd like to ask of you to educate yourself and your ERG members on the identities outside of the L, G, B, and T. Make sure you include Two-Spirit or 2S into that conversation. And I applaud you for being here today to start that journey. We've also given you each a flag, a Two-Spirit flag in the chair, and for those who have walked in, if you need one, come find me, to take home and to continue that conversation. Don't be afraid to get it wrong or mess it up. Just be passionate and humble during your process. Like any marginalized community, making an effort to learn and become an ally helps in the fight for equality. And for anyone looking for an additional resource to have in your back pocket, I'd recommend looking up WAPATH, or World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They offer a standards of care guide that McKesson follows, and quite candidly, it really is the bare minimum for what companies should be doing for their trans and non-binary employees. So in closing, if McKesson had never allowed me to create a Native and Indigenous ERG, I would have never discovered Two-Spirit and who I was. Or maybe I would have, it would just take a long time. So if you take anything away from today, remember that Two-Spirit people embody both masculine and feminine spirits, and that we're still here. We do exist, and we're not just something that you read in the history books. Help me create a space for that. This is my story. I'm Choctaw, I'm gay, and I'm Two-Spirit. Yep.